Thank you very much, everyone. Welcome to March's VET User Group webinar. This particular session, we will be focusing on assessment, and I'd like to take a moment to introduce Kerri, who will be presenting this session. Over to you, Kerri.
Thanks so much, Adam. So today we're going to delve into assessment in Canvas and focus on VET compliance and what we need to do to make sure that our assessment's going to be compliant when we get to an audit. Now, what we're going to talk about are just some very generic terms, but I like to get feedback from all of you about what you're doing as well when it comes to this, because there is no one right way. There's so many different ways, because as Damien said, this Canvas wasn't developed for VET. We've just said we like it, so we want to use it. So therefore, we're doing workarounds and looking at the way the system works to how we can make it work for us. So if you've got ways that you do some of these things, jump in and let us know as well. Now, one of the first things that we do in VET is we make sure that we've got authenticity in our assessment. So that's one of our rules of evidence, and we need to make sure that students are the student who is submitting the work and providing that information for us. So there's a few things that we would be doing there. And one thing that we could be doing is an authenticity statement. So just throw your hands up in the chat if that's something that you are already doing with your assessment, is requiring students to complete some level of authenticity of assessment. Ways that I have seen this done: we've got a markers done on a page, so you can have information about what it is you're saying as your authenticity statement, that it's your work, that you've not copied anyone else's work, etc., and then having a markers done in the top. So that's done under our module progression. Another thing that can be seen is adding it as a question in a quiz, and it might be a standalone question in a quiz, or if you are using the quiz tool to provide spaces for short answers or longer answers, it might be the very first one or the very last question that you might have in there. Some are also doing a general authenticity quiz for the entire course or the entire unit. So everything that's in that Canvas course, they might do a quiz at the beginning. It's an unmarked quiz, basically, where the students are coming in and saying, yes, everything in this course is going to be my work. So they're not making them sign that or submit that statement on each assessment. They do it as a upfront that all work is going to be their own. So lots of different ways of doing that, but it's something that we need to build in there somewhere so that the students are reminded that it does need to be their own work. We also need to have a look at instructions for students. So when it comes to providing your assessment, and this is what I'm going to skip over quickly into Megan's assessment. And I'm just going to jump into one of the observations there. Okay, so in here we've got an observation. Rather than just getting straight into this is your task, there's information and instructions. So in that actual assignment, this is the assignment itself, there's information to the student about what they need to do, information to the assessor about what they need to do. So it's telling the student at the top that there's nothing that they need to do from this one, because this is an observation. This is where the assessor is going to observe what the student's doing. So we need to make it very clear to the student what it is that they need to do, including on how they need to submit their assessment. That would include telling them that they need to click on the submit button to put it in. So what are the steps that they have to follow? You would probably have something at your start of the course where you get information provided to students to step them through the how-to in the system, but it's always good to have that little bit of information at the point of assessment so that they get a refresher on what it is that they need to be doing. So in here, this tells the student that they need to download the form, provide it to their workplace supervisor. Then when they've had it filled out, they're going to come back here and submit. Now, this is funded training, so therefore it needs that physical signature on there for the particular contract it's under. So it does need to be downloaded, signed and uploaded. And then we've got extra information to the assessor. So making sure we've got those clear instructions on all of our assessment pieces, including our quizzes. The area that I see the most questions come up is around rubrics and outcomes. I think when it comes to the assessments, setting up quizzes, knowing what you can do for an auto-marked quiz where you've got multiple choice questions, etc., there's a bit more understanding there. But when it comes to the practicals and the assessments where you've got your observations, what do you use your rubrics for and what do you use your outcomes for? Now, there's different levels of information that you can provide here. And what I've seen different approaches where sometimes we use an outcome for every single item on the checklist in the rubric. But what I find is that's a lot of information that takes a long time to set up by going through and creating the outcomes. And then it's a lot of information that you're reporting on, because if you want to be able to draw a report out based on your outcomes, you're reporting on, it might be 20 or 30 items in your observation checklist, and you might have 14 observation checklists in your course. That's a lot of outcomes to be reporting on. What I've narrowed it down to is it's better to keep your rubric as just a rubric in the course where you're outlining what your observable behaviours are. So I'm just going to jump over to this practical assessment. So we've got portfolios or observations that you're going to create a checklist for. When it comes to your theory questions and you've just got multiple choice or a short answer where you've got a sample response, that's a little bit easier because the answer's right or wrong, or you've got your sample response there that you're marking against. It's when we get into the longer written responses or a project, a portfolio or observation that you need this checklist to mark, because that's your decision-making tool. So when it comes to marking, that's when we use our rubric. Your rubric needs to be basically what you would put in an observation checklist. So by putting it into Canvas, it makes it so much easier than having a separate paper-based checklist where you're marking these things off and then needing to scan and upload. By building it into the rubric, you're clicking yes or no, or satisfactory or not satisfactory. And each line of that rubric allows you to put a comment in so that you can put what you would have on a piece of paper where you've got your satisfactory or not satisfactory columns, and then you've got a comments column. You can recreate that using the rubric. So make sure that that's your observable behaviours and then any project items if it's a project. So again, I'm going to skip over to Megan's example. I'm going to go to our observation report. Now with this one, we've gone to that extra level of putting the performance criteria or the knowledge evidence, so actually mapping out each item on here. You don't necessarily need to go to that level. We've been very specific with mapping this out. But we have numbered each item because when we go back to our mapping document, it's this number that's been referenced in the mapping document. You don't necessarily have to say 1.1, 1.2, 1.3. You might just say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then that's what you use to map. This one's been mapped that way because there's multiple tasks, and so task 1 is 1, and then the item on the checklist is the 2, 3, 4. Notice here that we've got satisfactory and not yet satisfactory. So it's not competent or not competent because this is at the task level, not at the unit level. We've got all the individual observable behaviours here. So these are not copied and pasted from the unit of competency. These are changed to be based on what the task is that the student's doing. Now this is workplace based, so it's a little bit harder to be very specific because the student's going to be doing different tasks depending on the workplace that they're in. So that's why it's a little bit more broad than what you might see if it was a project that was very specific. When we mark this as an assessor, we're going to go down and mark satisfactory or not satisfactory, but there are some that have got a few extra bits and pieces in them where we've given a note to the assessor to actually say, put the extra items in the comments area. So they need to carry out the following, and we didn't want to make these each as a separate line because as you can see, it's a long checklist. It was getting a bit too big. So rather than putting each of those on a separate line, and it was that, it could be any of these, we were going to put that in the comments. So any extra information for the assessor, we added in here. Then something else that we do in terms of the outcomes, we've developed somewhere where it's a final sign-off. Now, if you've got an integration with VETTrack, JobReady, Accelerate, any other system, and you've got all your results being pushed back, and you're pushing back the results from every assessment, and then your system is actually making a decision of competence. Well, it's not an assessor making that decision. It was actually someone from Damien's RTO that brought this comment up with me, and we had a discussion around it. We went, yeah, it needs to be the assessor that's signing off on the unit, not a system sign off. The assessor determines when a student is competent. So I've started recommending including the creation of an outcome for a unit. And Adam's put there, outcomes at the root level, so they can be shared across all courses. With the units of competency outcomes, that will depend on how you've got your structure in here, because sometimes the outcome of a unit only needs to be within that sub-account. It depends on that structure. If you are trying to really separate it because you've got very different qualification areas in your RTO, then you might separate it at the sub-account level. But if it's something that you want to be sharing across sub-accounts or across courses, it needs to be at that root level. But what we've done by doing this is we can create an outcome report that's going to tell us which students have been marked off as competent for AHC and AR 101, and any students that are not competent. So as a final outcome, it gives us that reporting capability. I've found that to be a better approach than doing outcomes for every single item on the observation checklist, just because we don't usually need to be reporting on anything at that individual task level on an observation checklist. What we are really wanting to see is overall, has there been an achievement or not? You might decide that you want to include at the bottom of one of these, you might want to see, is this task overall satisfactory? And you might want to actually add in another outcome at the bottom of this, where you're saying overall, the student has been satisfactory at their observation, and create that as an outcome so that you can report on that. So think about that in terms of, do you want to report on something? If you do, you need to be using outcomes for that. For the individual items on the checklist, probably not. It's at that higher level. So jumping back over here, that was that point there about the overall sign-off using an outcome. Jumping back up to our knowledge assessment then. Again, clear instructions to students is what's going to make all the difference. Students are going to be able to be successful in their assessment if they know that they've got a certain amount of time. So if you've put a time limit on, make sure that they know that. If you are giving them a limit of 3 attempts or 2 attempts, make sure that they know that. There is an option in new quizzes that you can actually put a break between their first attempt and their second attempt if you wanted to. So you might say that they need to wait for half an hour before they go and have another attempt, so that they need to go and have a look at their materials. And you can put that in your instructions at the top to say, before you take another attempt, make sure you go back and revise the materials so that you don't waste your second attempt. Because essentially, we want students to be 100% when it comes up to being competent, especially when we're doing this in automated quizzes, because it's not like we would be looking at it and choosing items that were critical to be covered and areas that might be a bit more repetitive, and we say, oh, well, we've got 3 questions on that and they've gotten 2 right, so we might pass that off. In this sort of knowledge assessment where it is multiple choice, true, false, etc., you really want them to be 100% to be able to mark them off, because it's not against a rubric. You do have the moderation option in new quizzes so that you can go in and give students additional attempts. So if you want to give students 3 attempts and it's a total of 3 attempts, I would be saying allocate 2 attempts. And then you can have a conversation with students before you allow them another attempt and open that up as an extra attempt. Otherwise, they rush through and they go and do first go, oh, I got one wrong, try again, off they go. And they'll do it bang, bang, bang 3 times in a row, unless you put things in place to stop them, slow them down, tell them to go back to their materials, because it's just too easy when it's automated and they can come back and do that straight away. So put those things in place, and also think about your question types as to your unit of competency, and making sure what you're asking is going to be rigorous enough. Avoid having multiple choice questions. So let's say our assessment is going to be 5 multiple choice questions, and in each question it's saying what equipment can be used to clean tables to make sure that they're disinfected. And it might say cloth, disposable towel. Yeah, it might have a big list of things, and then there's an all of the above. Don't have 5 questions that end up being all of the above, all of the above, all of the above. You need to have question design for compliance. You need to have question design for your assessment that's really going to challenge learners. So make sure that it's not obvious. Don't have a throwaway item as one of the multiple choice items. Don't have something that really stands out as being obvious when compared to the rest. So don't have something that's a very detailed 2-line answer and everything else is 2 words. Make it so that they really have to think about what that correct answer is. Also, don't make it about proofreading. Okay, don't make it so that, okay, if one word is different, that's the one that they've got to choose. Make sure they really need to know the content and think about it to be able to answer the question. Also look at the other question types that you've got. So there's a response to stimulus in new quizzes, which is a really good assessment type. So it creates a space where you can set up some stimulus material, and that might be your case study, and then you can attach multiple questions to that stimulus material. And it gives you that option of going into more depth around the base material. Lots of other different things that you could consider, but trying to keep this as a short session going over the basics of the assessment to make sure that students are going to be successful and that you're going to be compliant. These are the main points there. So think about your practicals, making sure that you've got your checklists, using your rubrics and your outcomes. Make sure that you've got an authenticity statement, and then make sure your auto-marked assessment is rigorous enough that it's not just going through the steps, and make sure you've got coverage of your unit in those questions. Grace has asked, is it correct that you can add waiting periods for additional attempts in new quizzes? So yes, you can add waiting periods. So if I was to just let me jump into my instance so that I can make a little quiz up. And in here, if we were to go in and set up a new quiz. Okay. So if I'm in my new quiz and I go into my settings and I say allow multiple attempts. Okay, over here I can say limited attempts, maybe it's three attempts, and between them I want to make them wait an hour between each attempt. So that way I can make sure that my instructions to the students at the beginning say to them, you will have to wait an hour before you reattempt your assessment. Therefore, in this time, we recommend that you go back through the learning materials, covering off the learnings for any of the questions that you got wrong. That way, they're making use of that time instead of just going and doing something else. So give them that direction that they need to go back and pick up what it is that they've done that they need to correct. Now you can come in here. So if you've got students and you've done your 2 attempts or you've done 3 attempts, and then you have to have a conversation with a student around their results so that you can make a comment and make a note of what you've talked to them about because they got one question wrong and you want to discuss that and put in your notes, just like we do if it's a face-to-face training, and we can make those annotations. Go into SpeakGrader, put your notes in there. And then you can change the result for the student based on your notes. But you must keep those notes. You must put it in as a comment so that you know that you've adjusted the results of the student. Do we have any other questions around all of these bits and pieces that is assessment? Like, we could talk about assessment all day, but I just wanted to cover off on some of the key things that we need to think about, including the biggest thing would be those rubrics. The rubrics and the outcomes, and making sure that you have got a checklist that you're marking students against. Quite often I'm seeing that the overall checklist just says that the student was satisfactory, and there's no breakdown of what it is that you're marking students against. And if you were to go to audit with that, that would be found non-compliant, because you need that decision-making tool that you break down and say, this is how we're deciding that this student's met the requirements. So key takeaway for everyone today, rubrics and an outcome for the end of the unit. Any questions? No?
This is a good chance to pick Kerri's brain, guys. She works with a lot of different RTOs and vet providers with Canvas. So,
yeah, there's something that we sometimes struggle with. We've built a third-party system to address this for now, or at least we're trialing it. But how have you seen other providers who have multiple assessors working on the one course, and you know, they might allocate assessments to different assessors in different ways, but that kind of collaboration between multiple assessors and trainers around the one student, so that they can all kind of see what's going on at the same time? And just, I mean, we have our own ways of doing it, but just curious to see how others have done it.
Yep, so we could probably all sort of put in, so Damien, you do that a fair bit as well. I think it really comes down to making sure that we've got the notes there. Like you've got faculty journal, you've got your notes in your mark book. You can section people off and allocate them to different sections, but if you do that, it can impact on any report back to your integration. And also, if you're stopping the instructors from interacting with other sections, it might limit them. But I think the most important thing to do is make sure that you've got those notes available in your mark book. So the mark book has a hidden column by default that you can expand out on and turn that on so that all of your assessors can make whatever notes that they do. Damien, did you have anything to add there? Because I know that you have that sort of situation.
yeah, we do, because we have multiple assessors in all of our courses. And so it's something we've dealt with. We adopt the primary approach that Kerri was mentioning from the grade book, the mark book. Okay, so when you go to a cell within the speed grader, okay, within the mark book, and just hover over it and then click on it, is a little arrow that points to the right. Now, if you've never discovered, that little arrow to the right is a magical thing. Okay, and one of the things it'll do is open up the comments for that assessment. What we do is we make sure that every time we assess a student or change a result, every time without exception, we put a feedback comment there. It automatically records the time and the name of the assessor who made that decision. So there's the little right arrow that Kerri's clicking.
Yep,
you can go into the speed grader from there. And what I tend to do is I tend to use right click and open a new tab. So I'll often have 17 speed grader windows open at the tabs open at the same time, and then down the bottom right hand side there where it says assessment comments, assignment comments, you can write whatever you like and it keeps a permanent record. Shows you which assessor made the comment, what time it was made, and also all the feedback comments, the feedback replies from the students go straight in there as well. So that's our primary way that we want students to interact with us, because it creates a permanent record straight away specifically for that assessment. If you were going to do something outside there, a bit more general in terms of keeping notes about a student's progress or something like that, I also highly recommend the faculty journal. We don't use it very much. I think it might have even been Kerri that told me about the faculty journal, but it's valuable as well in terms of having one place where you keep all the notes about a student.
Yeah, carries across multiple courses when it's in the faculty journal. But Adam, we've got to get that turned on by the CSM. Is that right?
the faculty journal?
Yep.
Yes, you do.
Yep.
The only thing I would suggest to you is the faculty journal, like a few other things in Canvas, like e-portfolios, but we won't talk about that because it's a bit of a swear word, is that with the faculty journal, it is a very basic tool. And when I mean basic, I mean MS Paint basic. If you know what MS Paint is, you know how far back in time I'm actually going. So it's really important to understand that when you actually go in to put a faculty journal in, we can't export those comments in bulk, okay?
Haven't got it. Yeah.
Many people have tried before. Oh, how they have tried. Because it is actually, faculty journal was actually designed specifically for a client using our ProServe team. And it's somehow made its way onto Canvas en masse. My suggestion as well is with faculty journals as well, and Kerri and Damien, feel free to disagree with me here, is Canvas is a learning management system. It is not a compliance system. It is not a student health system. So those sorts of information, depending on what you're trying to chase, maybe might be better suited in your student management system. If you don't have a student management system, there might be a Google Doc or a Word doc that you want to keep this sort of stuff in, and you can invite certain people into as well. Once again, comes down to you. I'm not going to get in a discussion with anyone about that here because I'm severely undergunned before I start saying stuff like that.
I think with the like the student management system, it's really important. That's your place, your central record of the students' information, all of that sort of stuff. So that's a really important place that you would keep notes about the student that you might want to show, you know, the learning special needs or anything like that. But sometimes, depending on the RTO, trainers don't have access to that. So trainers might not actually have access to the student management system based on licensing. And sometimes that information does need to be recorded somewhere else. And the faculty journal is good for that instance where those people don't have access to the student management system, because the faculty journal stays with the student and it goes across things, but it's very basic. It's just putting a note in essentially on that student's file. If it's more specific to a particular unit or a particular course, the notes in the mark book is good because students don't see that. Okay, when it's in the actual speed grader in the comments, students do see all of that. So if there is anything that you need to record that needs to be kept confidential, you would put that in the notes in the mark book. Tony's asked, can students see the history comments when they check the assessor feedback? Yes, they can. So the
only
one
if they go to the not if they go to marks. If they
not
go
in marks, not in marks. They see, oops, where we were before, where Damien was saying that they record everything here in the speed grader. Yeah,
in the speed grader they can, but
yes.
If they go to marks, often they do tend to go to marks and they see the results.
Yeah,
they don't see the history of previous comments. We had a couple of students who, complained that they didn't see the due date or some comments because they tend to go to marks rather than go to the speed grader.
So Adam, did you want to comment on there?
In relation, sorry, I just took my headphones off for 1 millisecond. I missed that.
So if they go into marks,
yes,
they won't see the feedback. They only have to see that if they go into speed grader.
That is correct.
Yeah,
that is correct. Yeah, so basically anything you see there, anything that's in the assignment comments that Kerri has highlighted there, they will see. What I was trying to explain in the chat is that what you can do is that you can turn on, and I don't recommend turning it on at the moment, but like test it first before you're on. There is a feature option called Assignment Enhancement Student. That will actually allow them to go back and see previously submitted assignments, okay? So in other words, if there's feedback on the actual assignment, they can go and see that. But the assignment comments, regardless of which functionality you are using, will appear there. And to be perfectly honest, you want to encourage the student to go into the feedback associated to just that assignment, because that's what it's in relation to. We're treating every individual accessible item uniquely. And I've actually got a bit of things to focus on in relation to assessment. But once again, virtual golf clap for Kerri. Thank you very much. Awesome. I will stop the recording there.